A warm welcome to Philosophy Live. My name is Armelle Young. I am a student and tutor of the School of Philosophy and Economic Science. And today we'll be examining why American politicians currently find inspiration in what a Frenchman said about American democracy nearly 200 years ago. The Frenchman in question is the Count Alexis de Tocqueville, an aristocrat with many strings to his bow. He was a diplomat, a historian, a political philosopher. So here is a picture of him. So the Count Alexis de Tocqueville. And one particular work for which he is best known is his Democracy in America. If today's politicians still find inspiration in his work, and many do, it's because he understood both the strengths and weaknesses of democracy better than most of his contemporaries, and most importantly, he anticipated the very challenges that now define American political life, such as populism, individualism, the decline of civil society, and the paradox of freedom, which can potentially lead to what he calls soft despotism. A little about Tocqueville's background. He was the heir to an old aristocratic family. He was born just after Napoleon I became emperor. He studied law. He became a magistrate. The monarchy in France had been restored by then, but he was convinced that the democratic push in France was inevitable. In 1831, he obtained a mission from the ministry to go and study the American prison system in America. And this constituted his passport to discover the United States and understand what he considered to be the best available example of democracy. And from this visit, which lasted nearly a year, he drew his famous work, Democracy in America. This was published both in the United States and in France, so published in Paris in 1838 and in New York in 1848, and this met with immense success. So published both in French and in English. Prisons had been used as a pretext, but when he discovered America, he saw it as the most advanced laboratory of modern democracy. He crisscrossed the whole country in all directions. He sought to understand American reality as a whole, federal and local institutions, social and family organization, the role of justice and religion, the vitality of associations, the primacy of money. Nothing escaped his clinical examination. And all this is documented in his Democracy in America. In his eyes, the United States was an unprecedented balance between individual freedom and representative government, supported by an institutional structure that guaranteed the stability of the system. He considered this democracy almost perfect, precisely because it was based on powerful checks and balances and a committed civil society. But in Democracy in America, Tocqueville also sees the seeds of a possible shift towards a form of what he calls democratic despotism, in which public opinion, an overwhelming majority, and an unbridled executive power could ultimately annihilate this balance of power. And what he described as a theoretical risk then could perhaps seem almost 2 centuries later to become reality. So why would despotism arise from a democratic system where, by definition, the people themselves decide? So let's see how Tocqueville approaches this. For him, equality of conditions is the irresistible mainspring of democracy. He observed that unlike what happened in the European nations at the time, still entrenched in the old aristocratic order, the Americans, he says, have the great advantage of having been born equal instead of becoming so. And for him, everything follows from this. He says that in America, the principle of sovereignty of the people is not sterile or formal as in Europe, but effective and consensual, thanks to the extension of suffrage and equality in the institutions. It's built from the bottom up and not the other way around. It's based on local communities that are largely self-managed by citizens and by their elected representatives. He saw that elected judges have the right not to apply laws if they consider them to be contrary to the Constitution, or this creates a powerful counterweight to politics. And he observed that even more than a form of government, democracy in the United States shapes the social state, shapes the mentalities, shapes the morals. However, he doesn't just praise American democracy. While its advances are undeniable, in his Democracy in America, he sharply underlines the dangers it conceals. Tocqueville believed that modern democracies were threatened by three corrosive forces. The first one is related to individualism. Tocqueville observed that American democracy encouraged a unique form of individualism, one that emphasized self-reliance, personal freedom, and while he admired this trait, he also warned that unchecked individualism could lead to isolation and apathy, weakening the sense of community and shared responsibility. He feared, as a result, that citizens might become so preoccupied with material prosperity or personal interests that they would neglect their civics duties, allowing government abuse to go unchecked. So that was the first threat, that form of individualism in the United States. The second threat is that democracies are vulnerable to charismatic leaders who manipulate public sentiment. Tocqueville observed that democratic citizens, in their desire for simple solutions, could be drawn to leaders who claim to speak for the people while undermining institutional constraints. Democracy could give rise to figures who exploit public dissatisfaction. In this scenario, Tocqueville says that this could produce a government where the citizens become dependent, and they would only step out of their dependent state long enough to choose their leaders, believing that they've made a free choice without realizing that they don't actually have any real say. So this was the second threat, according to him, democracies being vulnerable to charismatic leaders. The third threat is what he called the tyranny of the majority. So he writes this: in my opinion, the main evil of the present democratic institutions of the United States does not arise, as is often asserted in Europe, from their weakness, but from their irresistible strength. That may sound a little counterintuitive at first sight, because in America, as he's shown, all the liberal guarantees are present. This should result in a good balance of power. But the main danger created by democracy is not that power will be weakened by pressure from the people, but on the contrary, that the power of the people, that is, in fact, the power of the majority, will itself become absolute and as such tyrannical. he saw the seeds of a possible shift towards a form of what he calls democratic despotism, in which, as we said, public opinion, an overwhelming majority, and an unbridled executive power could ultimately annihilate the balance of power. He foresaw that a democracy could destroy its own principles if the majority chose to do so. He argued that unchecked majority rule could erode individual freedoms, lead to oppressive legal or social norms. And he insists, saying that in democracies, it's increasingly public opinion that rules the world. It could become so dominant that it stifles minority opinion, stifles dissent and individual thought. And he says that he knows no country in which there is so little independence of mind and real freedom of discussion as in America. So for him, the power of the majority and the lack of critical reflection on the part of individuals, all this paves the way for the major danger threatening democratic societies, what he calls soft despotism. So, this concept of soft despotism, well, that would be a situation where a government, under the guise of protecting citizens, gradually removes their sense of autonomy and responsibility. Tocqueville observed that democratic people are dominated by two passions, equality and well-being, such as comfort, security. He observed that people are ready to surrender to a power that would guarantee them the satisfaction of both equality and well-being, even at the price of giving up their freedom. And there, despotism would take the form of control. The result is equality without freedom, a gentle despotism, but all the more formidable compared to our familiar notion of despotism, that of an emperor, for example. Tocqueville says this about self-despotism. It would have other characteristics. It would be more extensive and milder. It would degrade men without tormenting them. It does not break wills, but it softens them, bends them, and directs them. It rarely forces action, but it constantly opposes your acting. It does not destroy, it prevents birth. It does not tyrannize, it hinders. It represses, it enervates, it extinguishes, it stupefies, and finally, it reduces each nation to being nothing more than a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is the shepherd. In soft despotism, people believe that they are free because they still vote, have rights, and can express themselves, but their actual control over political life is minimal. Government control is subtle, operating through bureaucracy, regulations, social pressures, rather than open coercion. The central question is whether this cycle of potential democratic destruction can be reversed. Amongst Tocqueville's insights, a glimmer of light appears. He writes this: the vices of those who govern and the imbecility of the governed would not take long to lead them to ruin, and the people, tired of its representatives and of itself, would create freer institutions. So this is one possibility he suggests that may happen. Tocqueville did believe in the capacity of a democracy to regenerate itself. He did not believe that democracy was doomed. He was cautiously optimistic, but only if citizens remained active, informed, and morally engaged. He says that democracy is not self-sustaining, it takes work, and the work belongs not just to leaders or lawmakers, but also to every citizen. One question would be, what would Tocqueville recommend if he were to advise us today? The answer is not a simple one, but a few key themes emerge from his work. Themes such as strengthening local government, strengthening civic participation, fostering political education and moral responsibility, protecting freedom of the press and public discourse, of course, maintaining a strong judiciary and the rule of law. So, a lot of food for thought here for the American politicians and perhaps also for other democracies. So, thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this talk, please like it and share it. And do follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Philosophy Live is here every Friday morning at the same time for the rest of the term. So we look forward to seeing you again. Have a good weekend.